Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ben Community Podcast, the place where we talk about how to grow, adopt, and also lead in a world that's always changing. Today, I'm really excited, frankly speaking, because 20 something years ago, I started my journey in academia by pursuing a bachelor in philosophy. And after that, also, I engaged a little bit, not a lot, in Stoicism, and I found it really useful. Few months ago, I had a talk in Amsterdam, and over there, in one of the events organized by Ironhide, I had a talk about the future of job, and I tried to share the futures literacy framework in 20 minutes. After that, I talked with a person there, and he mentioned that he already started in a different way, started his journey, and then switched to kind of, I don't know, philosophical path. Started a podcast about Stoicism, and that was interesting for me. Erick Cloward. And today I want to talk to him. He has a nice podcast. I strongly advise to find it and listen to it. A Stoic Coffee Break. And over there, in some small shots, he's sharing insights and information and some personal experience, even over there, sometimes interviewing with some other people. But this time I had Eric to discuss and share. But the point is, maybe the main reason I'm here talking to Eric is recently during past year, I engaged a lot in futures literacy. And based on my previous experience related to philosophy and Stoicism, I have found some similarities between the mindset of Stoicism and the Stoic philosophers and also futures literacy framework. That's why I thought maybe it's a good idea to talk with Eric, discuss about his insights, and sometimes maybe I will add some more details related to futures literacy and explore more how the intersection between these two areas could be beneficial for people who are interested or who are eager to learn more how to cope with the challenges in this crazy world. So, Eric, I didn't mention about your book because I'm sure later on you mention about your book as well, but maybe it's a good idea after my introduction, also share a little bit about yourself. And first of all, thank you for joining me. I'm really happy.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my name is Erick Cloward. I'm the host of the Stoic Coffee Break podcast. I'm also an executive coach. I was involved in tech for 25 years as a software developer and a CTO. And most recently, like you mentioned before, I finished up a book called Stoicism 101. I was contacted by a publisher about a year ago, and they like my podcast. And they have a series of books, Philosophy 101, Ethics 101, and they wanted me to write Stoicism 101. And so it was very thrilling for me. It was something I'd thought about writing a book for years. I have, several documents already with ideas lined out. And so when they contacted me, it was kind of in a way it was a validation. It was saying, hey, we see your work and we think you do good work. So that was very flattering. Not that I needed it, but it's nice when somebody appreciates your work and sees the value that you're adding into the world. And what I do, I mentioned before, I'm an executive coach. So I work with organizations to take these Stoic ideas, and because they are so practical and very accessible, unlike a lot of other philosophies, they're much easier for people to get and to integrate into their lives, integrate into their leadership. I think the leadership is one of the places where people can have the most impact on their organizations. So I was doing some research a while back for a talk that I gave at ING, and I found out that 75% of people leave their jobs because they don't like their management. Only 12% leave because of higher pay. So what that tells me is that if you work in a place where you like your manager, you like the work that you're doing, and you feel supported by your company and the team that you're on, then people will stay longer at those jobs and will be less likely to jump ship somewhere else because they're happy where they're at. And so you reduce your turnover very, very dramatically just by creating a work environment where people feel like they're valued, and that they have a good contribution and that they feel supported by their manager.
Great. Later on, we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of practical approach you mentioned. But first of all, I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about your personal journey. As you mentioned, you started as a developer. For a long time, I think you worked as kind of C-level tech guy in different industries. But it seems once you found that you need to change your path and can you tell a little bit more about how you got into Stoicism? What was going on in your life when you realized that this way of thinking could help you?
Yeah. So back in 2011, I was listening to a podcast episode by Tim Ferriss, and he mentioned a book called A Guide to the Good Life, The Art of Stoic Joy, and said, this is a book that changed my life. And Tim reads a lot. And when he says that a particular book actually changed his life, that the perked my ears up. And then I saw the title, which said, The Art of Stoic Joy. And I didn't know what Stoicism was. And so that paradox between Stoic, meaning the traditional definition in English is Stoic is somebody who doesn't show much emotion, it's very rigid, very cold, and joy. So for me, it was a paradox. And I'm a linguophile. I love languages. I find it fascinating and interesting and how we communicate, uh, how the way that we speak has such a dramatic influence on the way that we view the world. And so I picked up the book and I read through it and I got some of the ideas, but I didn't have that life-changing thing that Tim talked about. And uh, so a few years later, I think I saw it on my bookshelf and I was like, oh, I should pick up and read that again. And I started reading it and then I decided, you know what, actually this will be easier if I just buy the audiobook and I listen to it on the way to and from work. So I started doing that, and that 20 minutes each day of listening to it, I kept having these light bulb moments. Like, I'd get to work and I would I would sit in my car and wait till it finished up just so I could finish that section because I wanted to grok that idea in such a powerful way. And so after that, that was when I really started to, you know, study Stoicism a little bit more. I got meditations, I started reading some of the works by Epictetus, I started reading some of Ryan Holiday's books. And then in 2018, I decided that I wanted to start a podcast. And I'd actually tried starting a podcast beforehand. I'm a musician, and so I love film scores and soundtracks. And so I wanted to start one where I, talk about film scores and show the themes within that carry through because I love the coherency between, the different songs within a film score, they like use different elements throughout the whole song. So it has a more cohesive feel rather than just random song here, random song there. I think at the time, and still one of my all-time favorites is Gladiator soundtrack from Hans Zimmer. So recorded a few episodes of that and then didn't like any of them. So I stopped that. And then, a couple of years later, again in 2018, it was actually January 4th. I remember like, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. It's my New Year's resolution. What am I going to start a podcast on? Stoicism was what was on my mind at the time because I had Ryan Holiday's daily journal. And even though I had thousands of dollars of electronic equipment, or audio equipment, I couldn't use the regular microphone because I felt so intimidated by it. It was just like, oh, I don't like the way my voice sounds, all these things. So I just used my iPhone, downloaded a podcasting app and recorded it and published it.
Fabulous. But my question is, you mentioned you wanted to start a podcast. Why? Because the point is you were busy with some other areas and okay, you could use I don't know, this mindset in your daily life, but you decided to publish your podcast and sharing what you already learned about stoicism. What was the reason you decided to publicly share your insights as well?
Well, the funny thing is that, like I said, I love audio, I love language and other things like that. So podcasting had always appealed to me. And the reason I started this podcast specifically was it was a practice podcast. It was just, I'm going to create this. I'm just going to talk about what's on my mind right now, which is stoicism. And it's going to be a practice so that when I start my real podcast, I'll know what to do.
have any, I don't know, big plan for your podcast at that time?
No, no, it was going to be a practice. And then after a few days, I had some people, some people who listened to it, and they sent me some text messages saying, "Hey, I really like what you did." And my ex partner at the time told me that I had to do at least 100 episodes before I quit. Thing because and she didn't say it had to be every day, but I had to at least do 100 episodes. But because my initial episodes were really short, it was usually about 3 to 5 minutes. I did 137 days in a row before I changed it to a weekly episode. And so I met that. And throughout this process, there was a lot of personal things going on. So my relationship ended about 3 years ago. Um, and so there was a lot of struggle with that. And so I did take some time off during my podcast, but because I had so many episodes out there, people were still listening to it, even though I wasn't publishing any new episodes for us. At one point, I think I took 2 breaks. One was for about a year and the other was for about a year as well. And even during those, I was still getting, 10,000 downloads a week. People are still sending me emails saying, "Hey, I really appreciate this." And then I think it might have been maybe 4 years ago. So in the middle of COVID, I got an email from Donald Robertson, who's written several books on Stoicism. And his latest one is How to Think Like Socrates, which I highly recommend. Really enjoy that one. And he had written a graphic novel with somebody, and it was all about Marcus Aurelius. And his agent was like, "Hey, we'd love to have him on your podcast." And I was like, I've been thinking about restarting it. This is a great time to start it back up again. So did that and just been doing it ever since. And it's over time, it has become what I call my public therapy, in that most of the episodes are me struggling with something and then thinking about how can I approach this through a Stoic lens. And that practice of sitting down and writing about these things and thinking through, what does this mean? And oftentimes kind of coming up with like a twist on things or a counterintuitive approach to it of looking at things. Um, and really developing kind of my own philosophy in a way based on Stoicism, meaning I'm not 100% pure Stoic, and I don't think anybody can ever be 100% pure of anything. But I think what they do is they take a philosophy, or in some cases a religion, and they take the elements that work for them, and then it becomes a personalized philosophy and religion. And that's what Stoicism is for me. Because there's some parts of Stoicism that I don't really pay much attention to, I don't really think about too much, because I don't find them that relevant to me, but I would say probably about 80%, 90% of it does. But then I developed my own philosophy on top of that. And that's what I like about Stoicism. It's not just a set rote ritual of these are the rules to be a Stoic. It's about here are all of these principles. So because of that, it's not just that you are a Stoic, but you are a Stoic that is based upon it's a way to develop your own life philosophy rather than just being a set of rules that you follow. It's about here are these principles and how do you apply them? And everybody's going to apply them slightly differently. But so you develop your own philosophy of life. And that's what I really appreciate about Stoicism.
That's right. Frankly speaking, I'm trying not to ask lots of questions because I think that you already also received some feedbacks in terms of how you explain the things. The way you are talking, usually it's really nice, kind of meditating, listen to your voice and the things like that. In one of the episodes, you mentioned that, I think you mentioned that people gave you kind of feedback that, okay, we are listening to your voice to sleep or something like that. I listened lots of episodes from your podcast, and I mean, the way you are explaining is really nice. So sometimes I'm just trying to listen. Would you like to add any extra point about the way you are talking about the stoicism? And maybe it's a good idea also, because later on maybe we will discuss a little bit more about futures literacy and stoicism. But for now, maybe it's a good idea to talk a little bit about what stoicism is about and also why it matters today. For those who don't have any idea about stoicism, how would you explain it in simple words?
Yeah. So I think there are several core things that when somebody asks me what is Stoicism, that I usually explain. And the first and foremost, and this one, impacts everything else within Stoicism, is that there's a need to understand what is under your control and what is not. And first and foremost is that Epictetus says there are things under our control, there's things that are not. Things under our control are our opinion, our desires, our aversions, the things we avoid, our pursuits, the things we actually take action on. And in a word, anything that is of our own doing, meaning anything we can take direct action on and make a choice with. Things not in our control are our body, our property, our reputation, our station, meaning, our status in life, all these external things, and basically anything that's not of our own doing. And so what it comes down to is if you group them together, you control your thoughts and your perspectives, and that includes your beliefs, your unconscious thinking as well. Past trauma and triggers and other things have a big influence on the way that you think about the world, your lived experience. And then secondarily, the choices you make, and then the actual putting those choices into action or not taking action in some instances as well. And so you really have control over very, very little. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to accept, because they're like, well, but I have control over this. It's like, you don't. Like one of the things I forgot to mention is you don't have control over your reputation. That's one of the things that Epictetus specifically points out. And what he means by reputation is what other people think of you. You have absolutely no control over that. And people have a hard time with that. They're like, well, but I do these things. And so I have a good reputation. And it's like, you can do the right thing and people will still hate you because you cannot control them. You cannot control the way that they think about you or things they say about you or anything that they do. Which comes to one of the harder things that people have a hard time understanding, then it's influence. What about things that I influence? Influence is just a probability of where your actions will be most likely to have their biggest impact. That's all influence is. It's opportunity and a probability. And so you don't really have influence over things. You take choices or you make choices and take actions in areas where you think it will have the biggest impact. And that's really all influence. So yeah, I know some people kind of break them down into three things, but I think it's fairly binary as far as that goes. You can either you control your choices and actions, and you don't control anybody else's. So that's probably the most important points that people need to grok from Stoicism. The other is living a life of virtue, that you do the right thing no matter what. And for the Stoics, they have four virtues. They have wisdom, courage, justice, meaning how you treat other people, and temperance, which is also translated into moderation or discipline. So wisdom is education and learned experience. Courage, step up and do the right thing. And justice, treat other people well, and then have discipline about those. And those four virtues are self-reinforcing. They all support each other and they have feedback loops within each other, because in order to be wise, you have to be courageous to practice self-awareness. If in order to practice justice, you have to be courageous and you have to be wise to know what good justice is. And to wrap it all together, you have to practice discipline to practice this other virtue. And then I think the third thing that I would say is that the Stoics are very big on understanding that it's your perspective on the world, your thinking around things that control how you feel about things. So we think that things happen to us, we have an emotion, and then we respond to that and we get results. And then it's that cycle, loops and loops and loops. And so people feel like they're on autopilot. But the Stoics have a point where they're like, no, something happens. You have an impression about that. You have your first impression. You have sensations in your body, whatever that is, you make a judgment on that, whether that's a conscious judgment or an unconscious judgment about that. And then you have an emotion about that. It's like when you have butterflies in your stomach because you have to go and sing in front of 100 people. Some people, they have that butterfly feeling and they feel terrified. For them, it's terror at that point. But somebody else, that's excitement. It's the same physical sensation, but their judgment about it is what turns it from being something that's terrible and awful to something that's incredibly exciting. And the Stoics were like, hey, it's all your perspective that changes your emotions. And so that's where the term Stoic came from, was that Stoics were really good about managing their emotions because they could manage their thinking around the things that were happening to them. So something bad happens and everybody else is running around freaking out. And the Stoic is going, wow, I'm feeling really, I got all these sensations and I'm kind of stressed about this thing. How do I want to respond to this rather than react to this? And so that's where the term Stoic came from, is that the Stoics kept their calm when things were going crazy and everybody else is running around like a chicken with their head cut off. And the Stoics are going, yeah, this really sucks. How do I want to respond to this? And like, don't you have any emotions? Like, oh, I'm feeling those emotions. I'm just not reacting to those emotions. And I think those are kind of the three big things.
So you mentioned three main big things, as you mentioned, how we think about the things, how to control it or not, also the virtue, and also the perspective, or I prefer to frame it as kind of perception. As in futures literacy, also, I already explained a little bit more in different episodes, and also we already talked about. It's a framework developed. I mean, there are different ways of explaining futures literacy, but now I'm focusing on the way Real Miller talked about, because I already also talked with Real about my idea related to it, the intersection between Stoicism and also futures literacy. That's why it's the way of explaining the intersection between these two ones. In futures literacy, as you mentioned, also we are trying to think about future, but not the future, about a future, or I prefer to say futures, which means
Mhm.
there's no future. At the same time, there are lots of futures, and we have no idea about what future holds for us. But most of the time, we are trying to think how we can control everything, how we can use the current situation, the trends, the previous experiences to predict the future, to know what is the future. But the point is, usually we are thinking in kind of frame. I mean, the Hollywood movies are, I don't know, my language, my background, my education, even my skin color. Everything can put me in a frame to think about future in a way which is not, exactly about what future holds for us. That's why another, as you mentioned, maybe the perspective is a nice phrase. Our perspective in futures literacy is how we can use our imagination to think about future in a different way, reframe it and rethink about it, and then find some actions and actionable solutions to bring in our present, and try, as you mentioned, maybe focus on what we can control, even if it's a little bit, or even sometimes taking agency. In futures literacy, based on my understanding, means sometimes you need to do nothing. Just observing. Even in that way, being a passive person is kind of proactive approach. Because, okay, as you mentioned, when I cannot control that situation, why I have to struggle? I just need to wait. And sometimes I mentioned when we started our conversation about this episode, I told you that I have no idea what is the next step. Even I didn't think specifically about specific questions, because going forward with the flow much more important than, okay, some having some specific plans, because after a while you can learn more, you can, I don't know, for example, cope with some new situation, and then some simple stuff can change your way in a different way. Same as you just listen to a podcast, and then you had no idea about that time that, oh, okay, in 10 years then I have, for example, that podcast. And that was interesting for me, because, for example, you mentioned when I started my podcast, I just started as kind of practice, and I had no idea any mega plan how to develop it, the content, how many episodes we want. I want to publish and the things like that. But my question is, when we are talking about control something, how we can understand? Okay, I can control it, because when when you don't know everything, maybe I think, okay, I cannot plan or control something. But when you start engaging after a while, you can find, okay, for example, I can do more in terms of, for example, the things related to environment or human rights or whatever. But sometimes maybe you just do nothing and think, okay, when you cannot control. For example, that specific thing is why I have to do anything. You know, I cannot just understand for now. I just want to ask you how you bring that mindset in terms of control or not control something in your daily life and make a decision how to act, react, or I don't know, taking agencies towards the things happening around you.
I I use a very for me, it's a very powerful heuristic about understanding what it is I have control over and what I don't. And that is simply that it's anywhere that I have a choice. That's it. I have control over if there's a choice that I can make, then that's what I can control. If I can make this choice and take an action on something, then that's where I have control. And that's really what it is. And I think a lot of people struggle with, okay, how do I understand that? And it's like, well, do you have a choice in front of you? Well, yeah, I have three choices in front of me. Those are things you can control. You can choose which choice you want to make and then take action on that choice. It's really that simple. And a lot of people have a hard time, differentiating that. So for me, that was one of those big aha moments like, oh, so anywhere I have a choice. I mean, I like the choices that are presented to me, but I still have a choice. Um, so James Stockdale, who was a Vietnam veteran who was a POW, was a big practitioner of Stoicism. And his plane was shot down over Vietnam, and he was put in a prison camp, I think, for almost 8 years. And he talked about how when he was parachuting down, after his plane got shot down, he's like, he knew he was going to be captured. He knew it was going to be a hard time. And so he fortified his mind and started thinking about everything he'd learned from Epictetus. And he's like, even in the being a prisoner of war in these things, I still have choices. They're incredibly limited. I may not like the choices that I have, but I still have choices. I have a choice of my attitude, of how I want to perceive what's happening to me. I have choices of whether or not I follow what the guards tell me to do. I have choices of whether or not I want to give up information. I have choices of how I treat my fellow campmates. I still have choices. Those are the things that are under my control.
Nice. Exactly. This is the point maybe I mentioned. I framed it as taking agency, which means, okay, times we think, okay, I cannot control, for example, the things happening outside of us. But the point is, taking agency means even sometimes if you decide to do nothing, this is about taking agency. As you mentioned, it's about, okay, how I can choose something. Even choose nothing is kind of choice for us. But it's really important to be aware about, okay, now I'm the person, need to take agency, make choice, even if I have no idea what is the next step. So I want to ask you something related to this topic or this area now. As I mentioned, and I think you're almost agree with me, when we are talking about future, we have no idea specifically what's happening there. Okay, it's totally out of our control, and even sometimes, um, I mean, if I think about my past 2 years of my journey in the Netherlands, I have no idea. I had no idea at that time about what I experienced in this period, even small piece of, the things I experienced. So at the Peru community, we are trying to apply futures literacy to help people to think in that way. I mean, thinking about the future based on their imagination, taking agency, and things like that in three different phases. And okay, I don't want to go for details for now, but my question is, in terms of your view, how can Stoicism help us face an unknown future? Do you have any advice or insight to share about that?
Yeah, I have tons of advice and insight. So, so a couple of things. On the positive side, there's again another heuristic that I like to follow, and that is when I come up to an obstacle and I'm struggling with it, it's that what I keep in my mind is that there are no problems, there are only choices. So every time you come up to an obstacle or a challenge or a struggle or something that's there, it's not a problem because a problem is something that we define. It's like saying, but wait, but you know, there's no problems in life except for we decide that we want something to be different than it is. And so that's what an obstacle is. Because we could absolutely do nothing in life and life would just continue to go on. So problems are the definitions in our own minds. And so every time you come up to a problem or an obstacle, it's really just an opportunity to make choices. And and again, that comes with a mindset shift. And I think a lot of people, when they come up to what they define as a problem, they think that, oh, this is just the way the life is. This is hard. And it's like, yeah, it, it's just that is life. And these things are going to happen. And so it's really about what kind of change you want to see. So keeping that in mind, that it's your perspective on things. It's only a problem if you choose to make it a problem. But I look at problems as they're just things that happen and they're opportunities for you to make a choice of what you're going to do about it. The second thing is that struggles introduce us to our strengths. You don't get strong by avoiding hard things. You get strong by doing hard things. If you go to the gym and you pay somebody else to do your workout, you're not going to get very strong. It's only or if you just lift easy weights the whole time. Yeah, you might have I did 100 reps today. Well, what did you do? I had the 5 pounds, or in this case, the 2 kilos. Well, that's not going to do anything for you. So it's through those struggles that we find our strengths and we're introduced to aspects of ourselves that we may not have otherwise found. And so looking at opportunity, it struggles as an opportunity. It's like they say, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. You don't get strong and learn how to solve things by going around it. It's by actually working on the thing that you get good at the thing.
Nice.
The third thing is kind of like almost the opposite of that. And they have this tool called premeditatio malorum, which means the premeditation of evils. And what that means is that in a controlled setting, you sit down and you think about what are all the things that could go wrong? And it's not a depressing thing. It's okay, if this happened or this happened or this happened, what would I do? So that you are prepared for it. And so that when something bad happens like that, that you are in a mindset where you're like, oh, you know what? I thought this is a thing that could happen. And because I thought of this beforehand, because I premeditated this evil, I'm ready to do something for it because I thought of what I would do in this situation. And so I think those are some of the most powerful tools that Stoicism has to offer is, understanding that your perspective on things is such a powerful thing because something is just an obstacle or a challenge if you view it that way. But if you see it as the end of the world, then you're going to treat it that way. And again, then also looking at the negative side of things, which again, some people think that, oh, but it's not just rumination. And it's not rumination because rumination is feeling depressed and going over the same disaster scenario over and over in your head and assuming that that is the thing that will happen. Premeditatio malorum is about here are all the possible things that could happen, but not necessarily are going to happen. And so I can be prepared for those things because I thought of them before they were going to happen.
Nice. That for the specifically preparation is one of the keywords also we are using in futures literacy, which means when you are thinking about futures and then try to reframe and rethink about them, then you are trying to prepare, plan, and then interact with the complexity. And it seems, as you mentioned, preparation could be kind of thinking in a kind of negative way. Okay, what is the worst things maybe might be happened and things like that. Then after that, you are thinking, okay, how I can cope with them, how I can prepare myself, and then plan and then interact with them. But still, I have a question. For example, imagine because also our main focus area is, for example, small and medium-sized enterprise. Now I'm talking about this area. Imagine I have a business. I'm business owner, okay? So I want to plan, for example, for next 5 years, and I have no idea about the future or about future. Then I want to prepare myself, plan, and also interact with the complexity. Okay. So in futures literacy, we are trying to say, okay, in, for example, three different phases in terms of revealing and also reframing and then rethinking how you can bring the opportunities for acting in the present. In Stoicism, as you mentioned, we are focusing on what we can control. But the problem is most of the time, that kind of approach towards future and that's reality you shared with us, which means okay, you think you can control everything because generally speaking, people are trying to think I can control everything. I want to plan. I want to know, for example, in 5 years where I will be. I don't know, buy that specific car, or live somewhere specifically and things like that. But the problem, or maybe the challenge is, then future will surprise us. Simple and easy. So how people can embrace this kind of uncertainty and ambiguity in terms of stoicism? I mean, uh, can you share any insights or advice in terms of that framework or that mindset?
Sure. For me, there's kind of three different tools that I think are really appropriate here. And probably the most important is developing an attitude of objectivity. And what that means is being able to distance yourself just a little bit from the emotional things that are going on around you. And that gives you that perspective to be able to look at things in a kind of a macro way. So like seeing the world, the Stoics have what they call a view from above. And what they mean by that is that when life is feeling too distressing, you imagine if you were watching down on the world at a 30,000 foot view, what would that look like? Everybody would just look like tiny little ants. And you would see that your problems and your worries are, in the grand scale of things, are nothing. But you would also see that other people struggle from all the same things. So that it's a way of kind of giving yourself a little bit of perspective on it. And that's just one visualization you can do. But developing that kind of objectivity to be able to look at your own state of mind, look at your own emotions that are going on, and in a rational way, and have that objectivity is very, very important.
Sorry, because it's related. So if I want to develop my this mindset, can you specifically share some solutions? For example, you mentioned, okay, I need to think in a different way or look at myself in a different way. But how?
Yeah. It's probably the two easiest ways to do this are meditation and journaling. And meditation by just sitting down, paying attention to your breathing. And then when your mind wanders off and you notice that it's wandered off, notice the thought that you're having at that moment and then bring it back to your breathing. And I did an exercise about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, where I meditated for 60 minutes for 60 days in a row. And it was hard. It was an incredibly hard thing to do. But in doing so, I got comfortable with knowing the way that my mind operated. So I could actually notice what my thoughts were rather than just having these thoughts swirling around in my head. I could actually go, oh, I'm feeling this way. What is the thought that there's the thought, and being able to kind of do that. And that allowed me to get a little bit of a perspective on myself. The second is journaling, just sitting down and free writing. What is going on in my brain right now? And just because getting it out of your head allows you to actually look at it and realize that all these thoughts that are swirling around in your head are just images. They're just words. They're just ideas. But getting them down on paper and being able to articulate that is a really good way of giving yourself a little bit of a distance from that. So I think that for me is probably one of the biggest things, is that objectivity to deal with ourselves. The third thing that I think about is I use a phrase. What's that? Oh, this is the second one. And I forgot what the third one was then.
Mention the objectivity, but you mentioned three ones.
I can't remember what the third one is, and maybe it'll pop my head.
That was my mistake.
No, it's okay. But I like to keep this idea of a map is good, but a compass is better. And what I mean by that is that you can make all of these plans. Oh, now I remember what the third one was. You can make all of these plans and try to manipulate the world to work the way that you want, uh, and follow this map that you have drawn out of where I'm going to get from A to B to C to D to all of these things. But if you follow that map, you may get out on the terrain and find that it's completely wrong. That you thought the terrain went up and it's going down. You didn't know there was a river right here. You didn't know there was this vast chasm right here. But if you are guiding yourself by a compass, meaning you just have a clear direction of where you want to go, and you keep maneuvering around all of these obstacles that come your way, you'll eventually get there. You may not get there when you wanted to. You may not get there how you wanted to. Most likely, you will not get there the way that you thought you were going to get there. And by doing that, it also allows you to learn the lessons along the way. And so rather than looking at it as, like to say, the journey is the most important part because that's where you gain that strength. That's the experience that you have. We focus so much on, I want this particular outcome to be there. And by keeping the idea of, I can't control what the outcome is going to be, but I can control how I do what I'm doing. I control what it is that I'm doing and how well I do those things. But that's about it. And the outcome is going to be what it's going to be. And the third thing is that when we're dealing with complex systems, which life is definitely a complex system, there's a framework that I really like by a guy, I think his name was David Snowden, and it's called the 4 types of problems. And the first one is that there are simple problems. Your door keeps opening and, you close it, the wind blows it open and close it. So what do? The simple solution is very simple. We've got well-tested solutions that have been around for thousands of years. You go out, you buy a lock, you put it on your door, bam, done. You don't need to reinvent the lock just to keep your door so that it stays closed. That's a very simple problem. Then you have complicated problems, which are lots of simple problems put together. And that is, there are solutions for every step of the way. You just have to do those in a particular order and you have to manage that. That's a big project, for example. Like, we know how to build bridges well already. We know how to build mobile phones. Those are things that are complicated problems, but they do have an end solution. You know that if you follow step A through Z, you're going to get, at the end, you're going to have the thing that you need to get done. Those are complicated problems. Then you have complex problems. Complex problems are when you have emergent properties, and complex problems are never solved. They're just well managed. So complex problems are generally relationships. Building a company is a very complex problem because it's all about relationships. But we try to do these things. We try to manage relationships. We try to manage companies, particularly just complicated problems. If I follow step A, B, C, and D, bam, I have the perfect company or I have the perfect relationship. And it doesn't work that way because it's constantly in flux. It's constantly changing. So if you think about it as this complex problem is just not something that I'm ever going to solve, but I'm just going to manage it well. I'm going to massage it. I'm going to move it the direction I want it to go, but I can never solve this problem. And that's a very different way of looking at it. And the fourth problem type is chaotic. And when you have a chaotic problem, the goal is just to get things back to normal as soon as possible. That's it. Natural disasters, health emergencies, things like that. Those are chaotic problems, for example, or even in businesses. Sometimes you can have a chaotic problem. If you run a SaaS business and you have a cyber attack, that's a chaotic problem. The goal is to get things back to normal as soon as possible. And so that's where premeditatio malorum is fabulous, because you think through all the things that could possibly go wrong and you think, what is the likelihood of each of these things in this chaotic problem? And the thing is, chaotic problems are they're complicated, but they have an urgency to them. They're not complicated, but they're complex and have an urgency to them. And it's all about just reacting to the situation on the ground. That's it. Whereas complex problems, you have a direction you want it to go. You're just not sure how it's going to get there. And you just kind of keep moving it along. Keep moving it along just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And so when you kind of can look at problems in that way and think about them in different ways, it helps because, like I said, we approach complex problems as if they're just complicated problems, and we should be able to solve them when they're inherently unsolvable, just well managed.
Great, great, great. I like the way you try to categorize different problems, specifically in terms of coping with the complicated and then, of course, complex, and finally, as you mentioned, chaotic problems. We need kind of different mindset and different skill sets.
Oh, absolutely.
And most of the time, as I remember in different episodes, also you mentioned about sales leadership and things like that. But at the same time, I think based on what you are doing as a coach for executives and things like that, I think you are engaged a lot in leadership skills or the things in that specific area. My question is, what do you think are the most important skills for future leaders, especially in a world full of change?
I think the most important words that a good leader can say is, I don't know. Let's sit down and figure this out. I mean, so a leader is like a captain on a ship. He's setting the direction. He's assigning people the tasks, and then he lets them do their tasks. He's not down, if he's on a ship, he's not going to go down into the galley and be like, hey, you're rowing wrong. Let me show you, he's not going to be doing those things. He's got the higher level view of where things are at. And so it's all about taking things as they come and delegating and supporting those people. So one of the best leaders that I had in my years in tech was at a very large company in the States, third-party logistics broker. And they created a new team. They put all the financial applications together. And in our first meeting of this newly formed team, a leader came in, and his name was Krishna Reddy. He was this very tiny little Indian guy. And the first thing he said was like, my job is to serve you. If there are things that you need, if there's software, if there's hardware, you need a better chair, whatever it is that you need, let me know. If there are people who are asking you to do things that are out of the scope of your projects, if there are things getting in your way, that are keeping you from doing your work, let me know so I can clear those out. My job, above all else, is to help you do your job. That's it. That's what I'm here for. And that was the first time I'd ever heard a manager speak that way. He was more worried about how well we did than he was about puffing himself up to get a promotion for himself. Because he understood that if he served us, then our whole team would be lifted up and a promotion would just happen. Because, if your team is the best performing team, which ours actually ended up being the best performing team, and he kept asking us like, how do you guys get so much work done in such a short amount of time? And the quality of your work is so. What are you guys doing over there? What are you drinking? What weights are you lifting? What's the vitamins? And what is it? What's the secret to your team being so productive? And it was because we had a leader who understood that the way to get the team to work was to one, to find that alignment, but two, to serve that team. And by serving, then he was able to bring everybody in line with the same goal. And it created an atmosphere where we also looked at a team as the team was the overriding factor, not the individual. And so if somebody came over to me and said, hey, my code is broken here and I can't figure out what is going on. I've been staring at it for 2 hours and I just can't see the debug messages aren't making any sense. Can you come look at my code? And I'd be like, sure. I would go over and look at the code. And if it took me another 2 hours to help them figure that out, that was fine because I knew that I was helping the team, even if that meant I was slightly behind, because I knew that if the reverse came, that I needed that help, then I could ask for that as well. And so it created this very tight team, and we were all got to be really good friends, and we're all supportive of each other, and had a great time. And it also made work a lot more fun because I really liked that job. And the only reason I left is because I was tired of living in Minnesota, where it was so cold all the time.
I like the approach you're sharing because it seems, I mean, for me at least, you're not trying to separate, for example, what we are doing as individuals, and you are trying to consider the context as well, how we connect with others, including other people or even the context, I mean, in general, we are living in. I like that approach. And it seems for me, it's also related to virtue you already mentioned and also our perspective. That's why it's meaningful when we are thinking how we can apply Stoicism in the real world, as well as I think the futures literacy. I told you I can see some similarities. Um, I have another question. Maybe it's time. It's the time that I have to ask that one as well. We have no idea about future as we mentioned, and just for example, listening to one episode was kind of a starting point for you to engage more in Stoicism, and now you are here publishing lots of episodes about the Stoicism, publish your book and the things like that. You act even as a coach for the people in different settings. What's one small thing people can start doing today if they want to not just learning about Stoicism, but to practice Stoicism?
Wow, that's a tough one in a way because my journey is a bit different because of the podcast. If I had just read a book and said, "Oh, that's a really good idea," and not found a way to actually implement it into my life, then I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today and who I am today. But because I did my podcast, because I was thinking about it, you know, on a weekly/daily basis and working and getting it done and taking my problems and writing down, how can I solve this problem from a Stoic perspective? That allowed me to really internalize those things in a much deeper way. It was kind of like you said, when we were talking earlier, a Socratic way of looking at things. I would ask the questions and be like, okay, what is my thinking around this? Why did I think that? What does that, what does that mean? And, of the framework of like the five whys, you ask why, and then you ask why about the answer you just had, and you go down five times. And so I think that it takes consistency more than anything. It's that consistency. And, like people ask me, like, how do you get a successful podcast like you have? So they ask me about podcasting. And I'm like, and they're like, how do you get listeners? How do you do this? And I'm like, consistently make good content and consistently improve your content. That's it. That that's the best way to do it. Make something that people want to listen to and do it a lot. Like as a musician, I know that people think that, somebody just they wrote this album and wow, they it's a hit. Well, you don't know that for the 10 songs that were on that album that back I'm dating us because we have, this is back in the days of CDs or vinyl and other things like that. There would be maybe 10 songs on an album, but you don't know that they had actually written about 30 or 40 songs and they selected the best 10 for that album. They didn't just write those 10 songs. And so they consistently wrote 30, 40, sometimes 50 songs and then chose the best out of that. But because of that consistency of writing 50 songs, they got 10 good ones. And so consistency is key. If you want to make a change in your life, you know, follow follow Kaizen, which is that Japanese idea that if you can improve just a tiny percentage every single day, even if you are a master at something, if you can improve just a little bit each day, then you will actually begin to be that's what's going to move the needle is just that little bit each and every day. So if you sit down and you meditate for even just 5 minutes every single day, if you write in your journal every single day, if you read about, Stoicism every single day, you're going to get there. There was a quote that I remember from a cello player. I wish I could remember his name. I think it was Spanish or Mexican cello player. And even into his 80s, he was still practicing every single day after a long, successful career. And a journalist asked him one time, he's like, I understand you still practice, 4 hours a day. And he's like, yeah. Like, why do you still practice 4 hours a day? I mean, he's like, because I think I think I'm still learning something. I think I'm starting to make some progress. And this is a guy who had a career of playing cello for basically since he was a kid. And in his 80s, he's still going, I think I'm still making a little progress and a little bit of improvement. And it was just that was to me, there's like this humbling thing of somebody saying who is a master that this is in their career and they are a master and they're still trying to improve.
Right, which means it's not just about quality, also quantity matters.
It
Which
does.
means if you want to be kind of perfectionist, then it seems sometimes you do nothing, but sometimes you just need to embrace unperfectionism.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you listen to like the first probably 50, 60 episodes, maybe even more of my podcast, they weren't great. They were not great. They were just done on my iPhone. Sometimes I put background music behind it because I thought that was going to be cool. And I had people going, "Hey, I can't really hear your voice because the music's a little too loud." I'm like, "You know what? I'm just going to get rid of the music." And some of the episodes just they were okay. And even now, I'm still after 335 episodes. Some are really good and some are okay, you know, but I still make them every single week because it's what I want to do. And I think that I'm making progress. And I think that each one just gets a little bit better. And the sound quality gets a little bit better. My presentation gets better. My voice gets a little bit better. The way I express myself. New ideas still come because I'm constantly on that seeking path of trying to be better than I am and to be smarter and to think a little more clearly than I can.
That's right, makes sense for me as well. And I already told you that just 2 years ago, I mean, after more than 3 decades, I started to communicate in English. English is my second language, and when I wanted to start this podcast in first episodes, that was tough experience for me, because most of the time I had no idea how to navigate. And this episode is kind of different experience for me as well, because in this episode, even I tried to, discuss with you in a different way. Because, when you are thinking in a philosophical way, you are trying to think at the same time and find some connections between two different areas. I already learned a lot about Stoicism, but in my native language. And sometimes I cannot find the correct, word for explaining in English. At the same time, I engage in futures literacy. And then I'm trying to find and try to bridge between these two areas. I mean, uh, 6 months ago, if I wanted to do something the same, definitely I couldn't. As you mentioned, just I started this journey. And I had no idea at that time, maybe after a few episodes, I had a chance to talk with you about the intersection or bridges between these two areas, which means, as you mentioned, let's start. Embrace. Good.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of how you put it when we are just talking about it further or before this was that not trying to predict the future, but predict futures. Use that imagination and then say, okay, if that's the future that I want, what steps do I need to take in order to get there and work backwards from that? And I really like that idea. And the Stoics were very big, like I said, about being prepared for that. And so by doing that, by looking forward and going, this is what I want the future to look like. How can I get there? What actions can I take? And you can trace that map back. And again, use that map as just as a loose guide to head you in the right direction and be open to the opportunities that are going to come. It's like Marcus Aurelius said that you should be surprised that anything happens in life. It's like you should never be surprised that anything happens in life because anything can happen in life.
Exactly. And the point related to using the map you already mentioned, that was interesting because there's no map, in fact. When we are thinking about the future, there's no map. We have no idea. I mean, uh, what we know about ourselves, about the world, about futures are nothing specifically. That's why the advice you mentioned, okay, let's just say, I don't know, let's figure out. Let's see what we can do, something like that. I really like that approach. So, for the last question, maybe I forgot to ask something important based on, I don't know, whatever related to Stoicism, or maybe you want to emphasize on something specifically at the end, what it would be.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest tools that I've been working on recently are ideas because, I even though I've been practicing stoicism for so long, I still struggle with anxiety. I still allow my mind to worry about the future, and I sometimes will get wrapped up in that, especially with all the political chaos going on, the economic chaos going on. Um, the struggles I've had getting my career launched over here, because I changed in, total different direction. And, a couple of weeks ago, I hit a really hardcore depression. And for like the whole weekend, I just had no energy to do anything mentally or physically. And I just sat on my couch and watched Netflix. And it was just like, I just could not function. And that's rare for me. But I do get anxious about things in my mind, kind of, worst case scenario and catastrophizing. So the thing that I work on is the Stoics have this term amor fati, which means to love your fate. And what that means is that you learn to love everything that happens to you in your life. One, because it's going to happen anyway. So you can hate it, and the universe is like, don't care, it's going to happen anyway. And so you can love it or hate it because that's just your perspective on that. And so the more that you can learn to love everything that happens to you and appreciate everything that happens to you as just part of the game of life, then you start to see life as the game that it is, and that you, like Neo in the Matrix, that you have a lot more control over the things that are happening than you actually thought. In that you just accept that this is just what's happening, and you start to see life as kind of a game that way. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but when you start thinking about that and internalizing that in a really big way, then you kind of reach. It's happened to me a few times where I've written about this and kind of described my thoughts and ideas around that, where they talk about those moments of enlightenment that the Zen masters have, where, they just like, you just accept that, okay, everything is happening exactly the way that it's supposed to happen. And stop resisting everything. Stop getting stressed about everything that's happening. Stop judging everything that's happening as good or bad. Just accept that this is just what's happening. What am I going to do about it? And then you start, in a way, it's almost like you're in a video game. You don't complain about, the things that happen in a video game. You just go, how am I going to solve this puzzle? It's just about what choices you're going to make. And that's where that acceptance of everything. And the other thing is that acceptance and that loving of everything that happens to you is so important, is because you never know when the worst thing that happens to you might be the best thing that ever happened to you. The person who broke your heart that you thought was the love of your life, you know, you you move on, and then years later you find that person who becomes your wife and or your spouse or your partner or your best friend, and you never would have met that person if you'd been in that previous relationship. It's like every new beginning leads to some other beginning's end, which is actually a quote by Seneca. And so learning just to love and accept everything that happens to you and not resist it all so much and make judgments about it can really go towards giving you a peace of mind. And it's not that you're apathetic and you don't act. It's just that you just go, this is, again, these things are outside of my control. They're going to happen. What am I going to do about it? And can I love all of these things that happen? Because, hey, this thing that's hard, it's hard, but it's also a challenge, and a challenge can be fun, and it can be exciting, and I can go do that hard thing, even though it's a real struggle. But I know that I'm going to get stronger and better.
Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing all these powerful ideas. I believe that learning and practicing the principles in Stoicism, as well as Future's literacy framework, can help us to think in a different way and cope in a different way with the challenges and whatever we are struggling with. I think a lot of us are going to walk away feeling a bit stronger and more ready to face whatever comes next. And these two disciplines or these two approaches can help us a lot. For our listeners, be sure to check Eric's podcast, which is a Stoic Coffee Break. We will share the link, and also, if it's fine with you as well, your LinkedIn profile in the description of this episode, which means they can approach you, listen to your previous. I mean, you already published more than 330 and something episodes so far. This episode will be available on different platforms: Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, and also we are trying to share some quotes, some I mean, kind of summary of this discussion as well. But I strongly advise after listening to this episode, they are listening to your episodes. It's really practical and insightful. And I enjoyed a lot.
Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
That was kind of way for thinking about bridging between these two ones. That wasn't for me kind of just recording another episode. I mean, at the same time, I tried to think deeply about the connections between these two areas. If you have anything else you want to share, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I would say just you can also find out more information on my podcast, which is stoic.coffee. So
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention, yeah, the websites.
but yeah, but thank you so much for having me on here. It's been really enjoyable. And yeah, I can definitely see the overlap of these two different philosophies of looking at the world. And I appreciate them because for me, if you can only look at the world through one way, then you're missing out on a lot. And so being able to shift over and look at it, okay. And to me, I look at them as supplemental. They add on to each other and they create a slightly larger philosophy of life, which I think is very powerful.
That so hopefully I have more chances to talk to you. I enjoyed a lot and see you soon, maybe around. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you again.